Good morning. This is Sridhar Ramanathan here with Aventi, and I'm so excited to have Kathleen Schaub on the line here. Good morning, Kathleen.
Good morning, Sridhar, and
Great.
good morning to everyone looking and listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome everyone to another session on Aventi Live, and I'm our co-founder of Aventi Group. And today I have Kathleen Schaub, and who I'm extremely pleased to have. I've known her for over a decade, and Kathleen comes to us very recently from IDC. She was the vice president of the CMO Advisory Practice. She had been at IDC for about 9 years, and prior to that was an executive at multiple companies, Sybase vice president, also Cadence, of course, Computerland. She was the CMO there, has an MBA from St. Mary's College University, and just has tremendous experience working with CMOs and marketing executives. So today's topic has to do with 7 practices for uncertainty in times of uncertainty. And so Kathleen, I'm so glad you're here today. And welcome once again, Kathleen. And the topic around uncertainty is obviously very relevant and timely because we have lots of uncertainty and things we're not sure are how they would play out. You know, COVID-19, of course, the second wave, not sure when that's going to happen. The economy, close to 15% unemployment, so we're not sure how quickly we will recover in the economy. The stock market's been doing great, but there's some questions on how long that'll continue. And clearly, marketing, Kathleen, right, has always dealt with uncertainty. So we're going to go through the 7 practices, and Kathleen, perhaps you can continue with marketing uncertainty and how that's maybe more acute in these times.
Yeah, so definitely the pandemic has thrown everybody a curve. I mean, there's always some uncertainty in marketing because marketing itself is what I would call a turbulent kind of a function. Marketing is about humans, and humans are intrinsically a little bit crazy. So we're never going to get the degree of certainty that I think some business leaders would love to have in marketing. But now we've really pushed to the limits of that with this pandemic. But when you're in a complex situation, whether it's a really high one like we have pandemic or just marketing in general, there's a lot of independent agents who are all making decisions independently. The situation changes rapidly. There's numerous feedback loops. It's why no matter how well you plan your campaigns, you could succeed wildly in several cities over several months and then all of a sudden have something crash. It's just the way that uncertainty and complexity works.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And of course, so you're no stranger to uncertainty because you advise CMOs all the time. And I know you put together a very nice article on 7 practices, very practical tips. Maybe we can step through each one of them, Kathleen, and start with the first one if you wouldn't mind, and we'll have chats and I'll give you some quick examples for each one of them.
Sure. So I like to start with the mission because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is accomplish something. And when it's uncertainty and uncertain situations, you have to make sure that that mission is simple and that it's compelling, because you're not going to be able to tell people on the team what to do in any amount of detail. You're going to have a degree of dependency on them to make their own decisions in the field or at the point of talking to customers or whatever. And so you're not going to be able to script things. But if you have a really clear, compelling mission, if you have sort of like a North Star, then what's going to happen is the people on the ground, even if they kind of lose their way temporarily, that North Star is going to direct them and it's going to help them find them. So leaders have to make sure that they are clear with their teams about what that North Star is, what that mission is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that metaphor of a North Star. And as you mentioned in your article, sometimes the North Star needs a little tweaking given the exact context that we live in. And so one example of a North Star it's not changed, but it's been a little tweaked is one of our clients, a company called Okta. They're in the security space. And I just want to read you their very short tweaked mission statement, if that's okay. So their statement, the new standard of identity for the new way of work, because a lot of us are working from home. So the new way of work. So would that be an example maybe of a mission statement?
That would be an example. And I think your point about tweaking it a little bit for today's world is a good one. One of the companies that I have worked with, they have made their mantra sort of for the current season is to help to stabilize their customers. So they're not in the business of now trying to go out and get a lot of business and, get a lot of leads and stuff. How can they stabilize their customers? A financial services company that I talked to made their mission to help make consumers as confident as they could under the current situation. So I like that idea of tweaking it.
Oh, very good. Thanks. So what's the next tip there, Kathleen?
So the next one is once you've got the mission, then you've got to move forward to the mission, right? And you're going to move forward in maybe a little bit more of a choppy way than you normally would under a little bit more smooth sailing. So my second bit of advice is to select waypoints, but and not to try to plan, really long in advance. Try to much shorter time frame, and to make these waypoints smart. So you're going to take smaller, lower risk steps, and you're going to be taking smart steps. They're not random steps. They're selected specifically to improve your insight and to help you make intelligent decisions along the way. So for example, one of the companies that I talked to when I was doing investigation about what companies are doing in this pandemic was a global events team at a tech company. Obviously, events decimated, right? So instead of taking a calendar point of view, which is a typical way to do planning, what they smartly did was they chose milestones. So for example, whenever there was a big decision that had to be made or a big payment that had to be made, are they going to make a down payment on a hotel block in Germany for the fall, for example? At that point, the team would stop, assess how confident, take into consideration the information they had now, made their decision, and then moved on. And that's a really smart way to create these individual waypoints.
I love this waypoint concept and milestones that are not necessarily time-based is the point.
Yes, they're milestone-based.
Milestone-based. And in COVID, we also have clients that have big physical events that they move to virtual. And rather than being time-based, one example is Micro Focus. So they're a big user group conference called Universe, which they moved to virtual. And they have all these different field teams around the country, around the world. And rather than time-based planning, they have a T-minus 13 weeks. So 13 weeks before they actually have an event, they have to see, are the conditions correct? Is the country safe? Have they progressed along the COVID curve so that they can actually do a physical customer seminar? Or maybe it has to be virtual. But it's not time-based, but it's criteria-based. And it's a rolling 13-week sort of plan based on milestones and hard criteria.
Yeah, that's a good events. Well, that's a whole nother subject altogether, but it's one of the most difficult to do from a milestone perspective because events by definition do have to be synchronous and time-based. But I like that idea of linking it to a time, but letting it kind of float a little bit in accordance with what's happening in the world.
Excellent. All right, so what's number 3 there, Kathleen? And by the way, for the listeners here, you're welcome to post a question and we'll get through the talk and make sure we answer your questions in the question box. Sorry, Kathleen. Yeah.
No. So the third one that I would recommend then, so you've got your mission, you know where you're going, you're taking the short-term steps, these that are more milestone-based so they can be more flexible to the environment. Then the next step is to communicate. So you want to diligently monitor what's going on because information is going to continue to change. And you want to communicate, because communication is what builds confidence. And that leads to action. So it's going to give your team confidence to move forward within the circumstances that they see. You might only have a vague idea of what the future is going to be. That doesn't matter. Communicate that anyway. Sometimes leaders worry that if they don't have all the information that maybe they shouldn't say anything until they're more certain. That is a bad idea because in the absence of information, human beings tend to make stuff up. We know we're natural problem solvers. And so when we don't hear something, we're thinking, uh-oh, something must be going wrong. So if the leader stays visible and keeps talking and makes the information as transparent as could possibly be, then you're going to build that confidence. You're going to be able to go on. I know one of the the CMOs that I talked to, not only was she increasing the cadence of the things like short stand-up meetings that they would have, but she wrote a email every single day and included the whole executive team and everybody to keep them up to date with what was going on day after day after day. And everybody read that email just religiously. It was enormously helpful in getting through an uncertain time.
Such a great idea, daily email. That's brilliant. In the topic of communication, here at Aventi, we have about 120 consultants, extended staff, and
wow.
7 partners. Well, I'm not saying it's that communication is really important, and we now we're Slack fans, so we use Slack religiously throughout the day instead of email. Email daily is great, by the way, Kathleen. I'm very impressed with the CMO as that kind of discipline. In our leadership team, we have 7 partners, and we have multiple channels within Slack, and we are very communicative. We continually, post things, questions, comments, things that are happening among our clients and in the market. So I just want to put a little plug for Slack, because to your point around number 3 is communication. I find tools like Slack are really helpful.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you that the email is a constant, but this multi-channel collaboration platforms and, getting out of the spreadsheet world and into these multi-user, communication is enormously helpful, because you don't know when people are going to need that information. So even if you're doing things like email, being able to even post it to something like Slack is a really great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So communications, the number 4.
Right.
Moving to number.
Right. Now this is stepping back a little bit. Okay. So you're going to set your mission. You're going to, have your waypoints. You're going to communicate. Now this is stepping back. The next couple of them are a little bit more oriented towards maybe a little bit more long range planning for leaders. And the one that I'd like to start with then is knowing what your priorities are. So it's a little bit related to mission, but often when uncertainty happens, there's a financial pullback, whether it's a stopping the budget or maybe even cutting the budget. And whether you're getting that situation or not, you do not want to do that haphazardly. So some of the bad habits that I've seen people in uncertainty or when they get budget cuts is, first off, taking a haircut, right? Everything gets cut evenly across the board. Very bad idea. Another one is, we're going to cut what's easy. So maybe we're going to cut all the media spend because, we can click the button on that one. That's a bad idea. Another bad idea is someone's opinion. So maybe there's, the head of sales doesn't like or does like a certain event or something like that. That's a bad idea. But sometimes you're forced into those situations because you have not really set your priorities. So what you want to do is you want to ask of every major question, how strategic is this? Which means, how is it going to contribute to your mission? And then how urgent is it? And then you're going to make different decisions based on which sort of quadrant that fits in. Things that are strategic and imperative should be funded as much as they possibly can. And there's always going to be a few things that are strategic, but not imperative. If you can make a little bit of movement in those areas, that would be great. You want to decrease anything that isn't strategic but is urgent. Now, maybe it feels like there's, what would be in that category. But for example, you might have obligations for revenue purposes to invest in campaigns for kind of like older, kind of declining products. Right. So you have to invest to a little bit, but there's no advantage to getting an A+ on those. And then, of course, you want to decrease, maybe eliminate completely anything that is not strategic and not urgent. In fact, a crisis is a great time to get some political willpower to cut things that you've wanted to cut for a while, but maybe they've not been able to be cut because of somebody's opinion or something like that.
Kathleen, I'm seeing a theme emerge in all of your comments, and a lot has to do with being rigorous versus just opinions and feelings and things of that nature, although there's a place for that. And as I listen to you about prioritization, one of the clients that comes up to mind is Zix. The VP of marketing there is a gentleman named Rowan Arona. He joined about a year ago, and at that time, there were many dozens and dozens of products that they had lots of SKUs. And he came in and did a lot of what you're describing here, Kathleen, with regards to identifying which of these are high growth potential, strategic, that deserve more investment, which of them should be retired and put aside, and which of them should be continue to be supported because there's so much revenue tied to them. You can't mess that up. So he did a very nice job, because believe me, there are a lot of opinions in his executive team. He did a really good job of prioritizing that based on a set of criteria. A lot of this had to adjust because of the pandemic situation.
Yes.
Which caused them to see more focusing, to your point, around urgency versus importance, the quadrant.
Right. And sometimes, during uncertain times, those prioritizations change, right? So you have to, that's where your mission comes in place, is to know, because you're applying it against the mission. If your mission has been tweaked because of the, being responsive to the situation, then you might need to tweak your priorities too. But if you've thought through them, at least, it sounds like the CMO that you're talking about, I personally went through that when I ran product marketing at a company. And it's tough. Those things can be really tough, but the discussion and going through those discussions with the executive team, with the sales team, with the customer team, those are very important discussions to have. And then in your heart of hearts what's needed when things change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just sort of picking up on your point around discussion, especially with the executive team. I know your fifth recommendation has to do with alignment and getting cross-functional agreement. Can you say more about your recommendation?
It's actually not quite alignment.
Okay.
So people use alignment a lot, so get everybody on the same page. Sometimes when you're uncertain, you can't really align. You've got to make decisions really quickly, and consensus does take a long time. But what the main thing is about, keeping cross-functional teams working together, it's just not only the team, but it's the cross-functional that's important. Because when you're in uncertain times, and as communication is happening, you're going to want information and viewpoints coming in from a lot of different key players, as many as you can. So you're going to set up cross-functional teams at different levels to make different kinds of decisions. So the companies that I see that are doing the best at working through uncertainty, they'll have the executive team meeting, frequently, sometimes every day for short meetings. But certainly the CEO, the CMO, the head of sales, the head of customer support. Depending on what the decisions are, you might need legal and HR to be involved in those. But being able to keep everybody on the same page and bringing their viewpoint to the table. And then you're going to need the same thing with the CMO executive team. And then also you're going to have working teams that are going to be going together, because you want to make sure that you can escalate the decision-making, the decisions when needed, without everybody having to be gathered together. You want to improve the problem solving with the variety of information that you've got, and you want to expand the capacity. I mean, it is amazing, customer service people can take over marketing jobs and vice versa if you need to. And it does happen. And sometimes that's what's needed when you're working in uncertain times and you have to be responsive. So if you meet more frequently and this cross-functional thing, really, really strongly avoid silos. A bad idea at any time, but a death during uncertainty.
It's such a great point, and I appreciate your delineating between alignment and actually just having good cross-functional teamwork and optimizing each of the functions. And one of the companies that comes to mind is an HR software company, a client of ours called 15Five. And their CMO, one of the things that she did really forcefully and effectively was to get everyone thinking about the buyer's journey. I mean, literally from the sales or marketing front, from the trial signups, because they're going up market into the enterprise. So the trial experience, the software trial experience, all the way through to converting to a purchase, through to usage of their subscription service, to renewals, that entire, we're all familiar with that life cycle of a customer, the buyer's journey and the usage journey. And to your point there, Kathleen, I thought what she did really nicely, she wasn't necessarily looking for agreement and alignment, but rather an understanding of, let's put ourselves in the position of the customer How are they going through their journey?
That's a really nice distinction, understanding. And what I like, and I love, I've been a proponent of the buyer's journey since before it was a thing. But the idea that you can then, instead of having opinions, you can ask and question the priorities. In this case, this CMO made the customer journey be the priority. So you can ask, well, how does it apply to that? How does it help this? How does it solve this particular part of the problem? And that goes back to the setting the mission and the priorities, is when you get into an opinion. I mean, I always assume when I'm talking to people that are, well, executives or marketing, smart business people, if they have questions or concern, they're not trying to be obtrusive or whatever. They're coming at those because there is something that is genuinely needs to be addressed. Now, maybe it's just, I need more information, or I need to reframe things, or we haven't quite agreed on what that mission is or what those priorities are, and that needs to be talked through. But sometimes it comes down to, okay, we have a choice to make, and okay, this is the person that makes the choice. We've decided that so-and-so, the CMO in this case, or the CEO or the CFO, and we're just going to have to override people. It does happen in normal times. You want to make that as little as possible. You want to sit with people and help them work through those objections. But sometimes during challenging times, it doesn't always happen that way.
This is true. So yeah, working together cross-functionally, more important now than probably ever before.
Yeah.
Number 6, Kathleen, what's the next?
Okay, so this is a little bit of a long range, and it's a tough one, okay? So which is doing scenario planning. And I think, Sridhar, when you and I were first talking, I think you brought up well, I've never heard too many people actually doing that. And is that still true, or did you find some examples of people doing scenario planning?
I did find one example. Yeah.
Okay,
actually,
so I want to hear about that. I'll talk about a little bit about scenario planning, then I'd love to hear what you have. So what you're doing with scenario planning is you're trying to think through in a more complete way, what are some different options that could happen? And this helps with resilience. And it helps to take away some of the uncertainty because you've already thought through some of the possibilities. Now, who could have, I shouldn't say that. In one respect, who could have thought through the pandemic? But if you take a little bit more of a global view, there definitely have been people going, hello, this could happen. And very few companies think about what could happen. One of the things, a little story I just read about Slack, you were talking about Slack before. Apparently, one of the reasons why they chose their name was because they felt that it was useful to add Slack into business because it makes you more resilient. And I think that's not one of these practices, but it is a generally good practice to be resilient. But what you're going to do with scenario planning then is think about at least 3. The typical, what it would be if business is kind of on its current course, then also what are the options? It could be, in this case, it could be a downturn. It could be a, really bad downturn, but you also could think about, well, what happens? And if this is happening at a lot of tech companies, we have unbelievable opportunity. How are we going to act? What are we going to talk to our customers about? How are we going to fulfill that unbelievable opportunity? Now, you want to imagine a variety of situations, and you want to get as detailed as you can in thinking through what the possibilities. Now, I have a friend who's a CFO, and she was charged with doing financial planning. She had to make just not one financial plan this year, but her board actually asked her for 7. She said, I'm going to do 3. And she was like, oh my God, this is just horrible. It's so much work. And so I can see why a lot of people don't do it. But I'd like to hear about the company that you found that did it and what their comments were.
Well, it's along the lines, Kathleen, of what you just said about doing, say, 3 scenarios versus 7. And I grew up at HP for 12 years, and I left as an executive, and it was in our DNA to do scenario planning. And then when I left HP back in 2000, I hadn't seen it as much. But one company that stands out in my mind is a company called Achievers. They're also in the HR software space. and I can't reveal any confidences here, but we were engaged to do a market requirements document. And the part of scenario analysis they did, Kathleen, is along the lines of what you just described with the CFO. They picked just competition as one of the drivers or triggers to tell you which scenario they're in. For example, are the big enterprise software companies like SAP SuccessFactors or perhaps Workday, the big HR portfolio companies, are they going to enter this space? I won't tell you what space, or not. And what are some of the conditions in the market from a competitive landscape point of view that tell you which likely scenario are they going to be in? So they did a very nice, and we were part of this work, nice work around framing scenarios based on competitive actions and monitoring those actions so that they would adjust their plans based on what some of the competitors are doing. So I thought it was a very nice, rigorous process.
Yeah, it's fascinating. One project that I worked on years ago, I was working actually with one of the large consulting companies, and they did the most of this work, but I got to participate a little bit, and we did a whole game theory.
Oh, yes.
And it was fascinating. I'd love to go through that exercise again, and maybe some of the folks on that are listening in here may have done that, but because it was very high stakes, right? It was like a bet the company stakes, and so we really, really needed to think about that and walk through that. But one final thing before we get on to the seventh one that I want to mention about scenario planning. When you are scenario planning during uncertain times, you're not going to have a lot of data. So, and you have to make often these scenarios quickly. So you don't have the luxury of sending your market intelligence people out or your product people out to do a lot of research, or hiring companies, like IDC to be able to do that data for you. So that's okay. Most of the time I am a big data nerd, but this is a point where you need to make decisions and prioritize based on just the data that you have. It's going to be spotty. And then, though, don't stop. Make sure that you have methods, again, through maybe it's your communication or whatever, to keep adding, monitoring the situation and adding, because then what you might have is this dynamic shift in what scenario you need to be acting on, and it may change. So, it's there's a kind of a difference between doing kind of long-term planning with scenarios, which is a great thing to do in general, and then kind of the short emergency triage kind of scenario planning.
Oh, good distinction. I like that kind of lightweight scenario planning, triage, smaller versus the big.
Triage. I like that. That's a good. I'm going to adopt that word.
Well, you used it, so lovely, Kathleen. All right, number 7, please. So where are we?
Okay, so this is kind of a wrap up, and it's kind of maybe a little bit of a looking at the bright side, if you will, of uncertainty, and going back to the comments that we talked about earlier, which is marketing is genuinely uncertain. We live in a global world where the sheer number of people and the connections between all of us and the pace of change that has come about through the digital transformation, which has been, really in play for 20 years now. It's a fast, complex world, and I don't think anybody with any smarts is going to see this getting less. So whether it's pandemic or something else that could happen, or just a shock value of not realizing how things can change through social media or whatever, we have to all accept that this is the way things are. They're not going back to the slow pace. And so we're all going to learn more about agility. We're all going to learn more about working in uncertainty. We're all going to learn about resilience and resilient supply chains and all those kinds about building slack into your system and things. So I think leaders should take a couple of steps and make this, sort of make a bug into a feature and say, we're going to set expectations that this is not going to stop, right? So we're going to get better at it so it won't be quite so painful. But we have to set expectations that we're going to continue to change. We're going to continue to change throughout this pandemic, but then we're going to continue to be more agile and change our ways permanently so that the agile type of management, calendars are going to shift, but they're going to shift by milestones. Budgets should be rented, not owned, and allocated as appropriate. That KPIs need to be adjusted quarterly. We need to tweak our missions. That agile attitude and the agile practices that are learned during this time period are going to be here to stay. And the current pain will pass. All things pass. That's, I think, all the wisdom traditions talk about that. But the agile attitude and the practices that we learn should be a permanent part of the way that business goes forward.
I love how you underscore attitude. Agile marketing's been talked about for a number of years now, and there's a lot of discipline that goes into that, of course. But this attitude point you're making there, Kathleen, underscoring that is, I think that's super good to hear. One of my clients, again, Malwarebytes, security software company, the VP of Global Demand Gen over there, is very good in terms of learning organization. She has her direct reports, directors, doing a lot of bets and experiments and being, agile, as you call it. But the attitude is it's okay to just try something new, like a campaign, for example. They had an interesting security tagline that they tested out at RSA called Security AF, and you can kind of guess what the word AF stands for, security as F word. And it was a bit risky, a bit edgy, right? And you have to think about their audience, which are primarily men, gamers, that sort of thing. And it played really, really well. It was a risky bet that they made, but they decided, to your point, their attitude was, let's just be agile, let's try it. If it fails, we won't do it again, but it's a very focused kind of effort. And she does this with her staff meeting every single week. They discuss bets that they can do, and things that are working, of course, they continue to pour money in it or continue to feed them. But they're learning, their attitude is, okay, let's see what works, gather the data, and then continually iterate versus the waterfall method. Like, hey, here's our calendar for the next 4 fiscal quarters, and we're going to march down that. And this agile attitude that you brought up to Kathleen, serving them really well right now during this pandemic situation where there's a number of uncertainties that are affecting their business. So thank you for, really appreciate that. It's a good one. They're all good.
Yeah, and I think just to put a cap on that, the agile, agile with a capital A, the methodologies, I think there's a lot to be learned for for that, but it's not the place where all the change is going to be made. It can be a helper, but strategy beats method and culture beats strategy, because strategy is only mental and culture is so much bigger. It's about it's attitudes, it's stories, it's rituals, it's framing, it's all those things that make things meaningful. And I think, again, going back to the fact that we are in very painful times, but there can be lessons that can be learned. And we're all going to, I think, take agility and uncertainty a little bit more to heart. And I think that's the silver lining. At least I hope it will be.
Oh, I share your optimism. I do believe that's a silver lining. A lot of good changes are occurring through these difficult times. Work from home, for example, remote working is actually turning out to be a real benefit for many companies. And a lot of the agility things you mentioned, planning, communications, prioritization, everything you discussed here today, Kathleen. And I appreciate you. I know you deal a lot with CMOs because you recently finished running the CMO Advisory Practice at IDC. And I'm just curious, maybe final closing question for you is, to what degree do you see CMOs actually living and breathing these 7 practices that you talked about? Is it a common?
Well, in tech, so one of the things that I have realized is that tech marketing, which is the most of the work that I have done, almost all of the work that I've done, and particularly in B2B, tend to be some of the most forward-looking. And so I find that tech marketing CMOs or tech CMOs are, I would say, relatively advanced. At least they I would say most of them would know that, are aware that these things need to happen. I mean, putting them into practice, particularly in a large company at scale, can be very, very challenging, as you know. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a difference between who's doing it or who's doing it at scale. A lot of the agility and things, I think, often starts in a small company where it's just easier. It's easier to get 5 people to do something than it is to get 50, than it is to get 500 or 5,000 or 50,000 for that matter. So I would say, at least for tech marketers, that almost everybody's past the awareness stage, and a lot of companies are in the what I would call pilots and projects stage. Right. But not a lot of them, at least in companies beyond small companies, are at scale yet. I think there's and putting something at scale is a whole nother way of working. But having said what we've just talked about, there's so much momentum, such power behind what is having to be dealt with here, that what could be years of transformation are now being pushed through in weeks or months. So I think when we get on the other side of this, we should take another pulse, I think. And I think we're going to find that people have gone much farther than they thought they could.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you. That is encouraging that you're seeing some people beginning to use this. So we can open up the floor now to questions, Kathleen, and thank you so much for all 7 tips. And I see one question here already, which is, how would you recommend someone get started? Because maybe all 7 might be a little bit overwhelming, but what would be a good way to get started, to go from, I know I should do this, to I'm actually going to go do this? What would be a good first step, let's say?
Well, it kind of depends on whether we're talking about the triage, triage, my new word, the triage kind of working on uncertainty, or whether we're talking about a more systemic change. Mm-hmm. So if it's a triage kind of a thing, if there's a need to get people immediately going, then I would start with the people and getting the cross-functional groups together and starting the communication. And the cross-functional groups being forced to then, deliver communication to the rest of the company on a daily basis or whatever, you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, how many things get done. And then with sort of a checklist of things that you wanted to work on, but that speed of having what, when Agile might be called startup or stand-ups, or, those kinds of things, I think will push things through. So from a triage point of view, I'd start there. From a more systemic, I would start with the infrastructure, or I kind of do them simultaneously. So the collaboration platforms, the amount of data that you're bringing to the table, the structure of the buyer's journey, those kinds of infrastructure kinds of things are going to help a larger company in particular move forward, so that you still want to do the communication, but you might not, without the push of the pandemic or some other kind of emergency, some burning platform, as some people call it, you might not get everybody to get, I'm not going to meet every day, that might be a little bit challenging. But if you start with, get some infrastructure in place and get data in place, then those things can become the push.
Okay. Yeah. Speaking of infrastructure, I had a follow-up question on that one, just to go a little deeper. Are there any specific, we talk about Slack as a collaboration tool, any other tools that might be in the stable of infrastructure that a CMO may have that may be especially useful in this time of uncertainty and doing more planning around the 7 tips? Any tools stand out that you should be using more or leverage more? Salesforce, Marketo, and any of these infrastructure.
Well, I don't like to do brand recommendations first off, because I'm not the best person. I don't always know what the newest and coolest is. But anything that is multi-user. So anytime that you can reduce the number of variation in tool sets and get everybody on the same page, so that they're all going back to the system of record. Any, so any kind of anything in the MarTech stack that you can, whatever is your choice, and you can bring people to be using the same thing. And then the other piece is data, and analytics. I have yet to see a company who is in the forefront of doing things that is not over pivoting on data and analytics. It's like, what are the success factors of making a company move forward and be more innovative and more transformative? One of them is having a little flex in the budget, so that they can do some innovative things. But then the next thing is really over pivoting on technology and data and analytics. I don't know what comes first, really, the data and the innovativeness, or the fact that they're innovative already thinking, so they go ahead and invest in the data. But those two things are correlated. Absolutely.
And I am seeing more and more of our CMO client base relying on data and asking evidence-based questions for decision making. And sometimes they have to go with opinions because they don't have the data. But to your point, I think, maybe more than ever, we're going to have to rely on some data. So I want to respect people's time here. Any other questions from the audience there? Avery? Okay, I think we're kind of at the hour there, or at the three-quarter hour. Kathleen, I just want to thank you once again. Those 7 tips are all wonderful. They're in a blog post. I'll show you that in just a moment. Kathleen is authored that, and I know you are moving now into, quote, retirement. It's hard for me to imagine you actually retiring on the beach with a pina colada. Maybe share a parting thought here, just a little bit about where do you expect to go, because you have such an amazing career, Kathleen.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And you're, no beaches for me right now, maybe the pina coladas. But no, what I'm planning to do after I take a little bit of a break is I'm going to continue to write. And particularly, I'm very, very interested in this new style of marketing and new style of marketing management, which is based not only on, agile with a capital A, but all these different techniques that we're learning from first responders, from the healthcare industry, from the military, from biology. There's so much that everybody's learning that is a management style so much more well suited to the world that we live in now. Not just with pandemics, but again, with the digital transformation and the speed and the connectivity and the challenges that we are so complex that we face today. And the management is changing. And I think there's some better ways coming out. And I want to be a part of investigating that and hopefully bringing it to the marketing world.
Well, count me as one of your first buyers of your book. And maybe I can get a little bit of a sneak preview.
Thanks. I'll probably call on you to talk about it, or to give me some more information. I'm all about getting information from a lot of people, so you'll be on my list.
Well, thank you. You'll be on mine as well. So once again, a huge thank you on behalf of all the people who are on the call today at the Zoom session, and also the Aventi team. We're really, really grateful that you came and spent your time with us, Kathleen. We have another one coming up next month. Let me just put a quick plug in it. Another Aventi Live on July 28th. It's going to be 11:15 California time, Pacific time. And this time we have another wonderful speaker. His name is Robbie Halford, and he is the head of sales enablement and commercialization at Malwarebytes. And what we're going to talk about, the topic then, is 5 ways to create urgency with your prospects. 5 ways to create urgency. And in this kind of pandemic environment, some of the buyers have kind of slowed down or frozen. How do you unfreeze a prospect and get them to move through the funnel faster? Really good topic. So we're going to have Robbie cover that. And so once again, Kathleen, a huge thank you to you and to all those folks on the call. Wish you a wonderful rest of your summer ahead, and stay cool, and have another pina colada on me as well. I might join you on that late today.
Thanks, Sridhar.
Thank you.